the reality is that, there was a certain lack of empathy. I had a much more, type A military, like, hey, just pull yourself up by your bootstraps, figure it out. And after, going through this experience, I was able to look at clients and look at business owners and go, oh man, like I actually see a lot more emotion in this situation. I can see how stressful it is. And sometimes, even with our best efforts, things don't work out.
Welcome back to Innovate and Overcome. Today we are joined by Mike Brown. Now he's an entrepreneur, an investor, and a wealth coach. Prior to founding and then exiting an 8-figure oil and gas investment firm, he flew FA-18 Super Hornets for the Navy. Now that sounds like some interesting stories. We're going to get there. But the combined tactical precision experience that he honed in the cockpit, he was able to bring with his real world experience to navigating the complex world of finance. Welcome to the show, Mike.
Thanks, Richard. I'm really happy to be here.
I'm excited about this, not just because of your background, and I think there's a lot of very interesting lessons. I've had a number of past military professionals join me on the program, and there's always some interesting stories that are there. And what I find is a common theme is a lot of lessons from whether it's their training, real world experience, being in whether it's battlefield scenarios or something that they're able to bring into the professional world or a future business endeavor. Now, many people don't forge into business, but the people that do, they seem to rely on those lessons a lot to bring them forward into their future life. What can you share about that for you and how that shows up in your own life?
Yeah, I mean, look, I say often that I wouldn't trade my military experience for any amount of money, and you couldn't give me any amount of money to still be in the military. So there's a wealth of amazing lessons. That, I think that combat is a sacred human experience, and I don't mean that from a morbid or bloodthirsty type perspective. I just mean that the ability to test yourself with the most critical, with your life on the line and other people's lives on the line, I think really forges a different relationship with stress. And, I got so much from that experience that I use every day. So yeah, I mean, I think it truly is a pinnacle human experience.
Well, I appreciate the way you said that. And it makes a lot of sense. And I imagine it's not the first time you've had to explain it that way to others. But before we hit the record button, we were talking a little bit about some of your background, and we didn't get into the military stuff a great deal. But really, you'd indicated that a lot of the world as you know it today really began after you sold your company. So I'm curious, before we get to that part of the story, tell us a little bit about starting your company before you sold it, and then what was the impetus of leading up to selling it? What was the decision? Was it you had a great offer? Was there something more going on for you that led to the reason to exit that first venture?
Yeah, great question. So I grew up in Midland, Texas, which becomes relevant when I get out of the Navy. I was figuring out what I wanted to be when I grew up. I always knew two things. I knew I wanted to be in the military, and I knew that I wanted to be an entrepreneur. So I always had, since reading Atlas Shrugged when I was 16 years old, like I knew that I wanted to start a company. And as I was getting out of the military, I had a family friend and my mentor invite me to join his oil and gas firm in Midland, Texas, and worked for him for a couple years, and then went out on my own and started with my business partner, who I also flew in combat with. So we figured we were pretty good at flying jets together. We might be pretty good at running a business together. And as my mentor said when I started, it was the best time in the history of oil and gas to be in oil and gas. We were just unlocking a massive boom with fracking and horizontal drilling, and unlocking reserves in the Permian Basin of Texas that were previously untapped. And so, as they say, a rising tide lifts all boats. It was absolutely the best time in the history of oil and gas to be in oil and gas. And we built that firm over 5 or 6 years, but for me, it was a very much an investment-driven decision of like, hey, I think we are approaching or hitting the peak of this current cycle, and I want to maximize our opportunity there. So that was really what drove the decision to consider exiting.
Well, I appreciate you mentioning that because I'm from Alberta, Canada, which is frozen Texas, as we like to say. I don't live there presently, but my whole life grew up in an oil based cyclical economy of the world, very prone to the economic impacts of the oil price. And of course, Canadian frozen oil or crude oil that we have, it doesn't, the bitumen we have doesn't sell at the same price as West Texas crude. And so there's
Right.
about a 25% discount on that, which will be made more impacted by potentially some upcoming tariffs in the new administration. But it's also interesting to hear you from Midland. The only time I've heard of Midland, Texas, personally, is actually in the book "Becoming Your Own Banker" that my mentor R. Nelson Nash wrote, because he talks about the First National Bank of Midland, Texas, which was, Midland was one of the most profitable, like per capita highest income places in the early '80s during an oil boom in the entire nation of the United States. And the whole bank was the most profitable bank, but got decimated after the oil boom because the shareholders were using capital and not, taking loans from the bank themselves and doing them in oil ventures, but not making any repayments and not making any plans for repayment. And so they undercapitalized the best business in the world, and it went belly up. And that's the story of the First National Bank of Midland, Texas, going back to the early '80s. And that lesson is implicated in Nelson's book, Becoming Your Own Banker, because he talks about the impact of that behavior, the mindset and the behavior that went into creating that environment.
Yeah, I mean, one of my favorite Warren Buffett quotes, right, is "When the tide goes out, we'll see who isn't wearing any pants." And that was definitely the story of the First National Bank in Midland, which I'm well familiar with.
So it's fascinating to me, but your experience and your thought, and I'm guessing because you were familiar with that, you'd also again read Atlas Shrugged. You were thinking about some of these things in advance. You were seeing the trend. You're from the area, so you'd known probably from your past, being someone who was born in the early '80s, what impact that could have created, and you knew that the dime was going to drop eventually. So the desire to get out was the real situation. So when you sold the business, you sold it at the right time. You were able to get out before the things kind of dropped and what have you. But you'd indicated that your real issues or problems about what happened after the fact started after the business was sold. So you had this great success, you had this bull run for yourself and your business partner over 6 to 7 years. You've exited, you're kind of sailing away off into the sunset, but that didn't really happen that way, did it?
That's a great way to put it. I say often, the day I sold my company, I thought I would never be unhappy again, because I had done all the things that we're supposed to do, right? I'd studied hard, gotten good grades, went to the Naval Academy, tested myself in combat, flown jets, at the highest levels in the military, gotten out, started and sold a company. Like, I had checked all of the boxes for the things that we're supposed to do to achieve the American dream. And by all means, I did. I had the money, the house, the cars, like, this Instagram worthy life. And 2 years later, I was so stressed out. I was losing $100,000 a month. I'd acquired a distressed company. Like, I was working harder than I ever worked. Nothing was working. And, you know, all of a sudden, I had this life changing windfall. I never should have had to work again. And now I got myself in a real crisis and had to take a step back and go, "Oh my God, how did I get here? How is this even possible?" And the reality is that I had not done the work to become a person worthy of wealth. And
Mhm.
and what I mean by that is, I made money, but I didn't acquire the mindset and the habits and the skills to be a good steward of that wealth.
Mhm.
And in my experience and talking to many entrepreneurs since who have been on similar paths, is if we don't upgrade our operating system consummate with making money, like, we will find a way to self sabotage and lose money. And that's exactly what happened to me.
I like the idea of the operating system. It's like, trying to build a business structure on Windows 95 today.
Totally. Right. And look, this is not a subject that most of us are equipped to deal with, right? Like, between politics, sex, and religion, money is the thing that we're never supposed to discuss. And so, we grow up with a lot of conflicting messages around money, right? Like, we're supposed to work hard and be successful, but rich people are also evil. And so, like, from the time we are young, we are getting conflicting messages about how much is enough. Is it okay to be wealthy? Is there something morally wrong with that? So it makes sense that navigating that complexity is really difficult. And then B, there's not a lot of there's a lot of education about what we should do with our money, but there's not a lot of education out there or resources out there about how we should be thinking about money, or
Mhm.
what the overarching framework for making money decisions.
I couldn't agree more. I love the way that you put that, and I 100% agree with you. That is a real catalyst problem with North America, and I certainly think it extends beyond that. But there's a real issue with a relationship with money, and just like you might want to look at, finding a spouse, that you got to go into a dating and a courtship and eventually a proposal, and you're going to make this lifelong commitment. I think people do that with money to a degree, but they often don't do it successfully because they don't think of it that nature. And if you want to be successful long term in a relationship, you have to really think about, what do you want that relationship to look like?
Yeah, absolutely. And so, when the framework I use is like, if you think about starting a business, right? Like a startup founder burns the boats, wears all the hats. They're robbing Peter to pay Paul. They're waiting for the check to come in to pay their vendors, and we normalize that stressful situation as just like part of being a startup. But then, as we scale that company up, we need different skill sets to be successful, right? If we're still operating with that same system when we're crossing 10 million in revenue, like, something is very, very wrong, right? We can no longer rely on burning the boats, wearing all the hats. We have to become good at building systems, at delegating, about, honing the craft of leadership. And the same thing goes with wealth building, right? We start as an accumulator of wealth, right? We've got everything on the line. We burn the boats, we go all in on risk, we bet on ourselves. But as we start to build wealth, we need to shift that mindset to being a defender of wealth, right? Which is a very different protocol and mindset from being an accumulator of wealth.
Makes total sense. And so, with your business and the sale of it, and of course, you mentioned you bought a de-stress business. Was there a lag time between the sale of the business and that, or is it something like, I needed something to do right away? Was there a boredom aspect there? What led you to the distress business that you thought, this is a great opportunity, I'm going to jump down and get involved in this?